I'm aware of time limitations, so the conversation portion between me and Jordan will be a bit more abbreviated so we can bring you all into the Q&A. I kind of want to start with the most obvious dimension of the whole performance, which is the central role of the accident. Paul Virilio reminds us that the invention of any technology or any technological object is also the invention of its failure. And Virilio proposed a museum of accidents, which would be a truer articulation of scientific development. And in a way, you've not created a museum of accidents, you've created a theater of accidents. And what's fun about thinking through the accident, because it's the accident that is the catalyst for all of the events. And it's an accident or a failure of a technological device that is part of a whole array of larger systems that are meant for control and mastery. So, of course, we've got in the midst of this a huge irony and paradox that's running throughout the entire thing. And this underscores the precarity, not only of the performance, but also the precarity of these machines. So, yes. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, yeah, I think it's really brilliant to make that connection and to have this provocative suggestion of the theater of accidents. So thank you for that, Ryan. I should put this maybe around the. So well, I guess to pick up on some of the possible paths in this really interesting subject area. I think that the interesting thing about the failure for me in this is it's bringing into play of constructive possibilities, which I think in terms of and I don't know to what extent Virilio kind of incorporates those constructive possibilities in his theory of the accident so much. You would know a little bit more, but I do find that I think that one of the things that really took me about this is that how the crash actually enacts a really productive force. And so on the one hand, it reveals inadequacies and it reveals the kind of inherent contradictions and weaknesses and problematics in the machine, understood in a really broad sense. But it also it opens up possibilities for reassembly, retooling, adaptation, and construction in the way. So that there's that it's oddly becomes really generative. And so I was really struck by that in this, and I think that's one of the things that really I wanted to really work with here. And I think that the failure, the accident, and the kind of impending sense of the possibility of breakdown or collapse or a lack of proficiency or ability is something that actually really haunts the performance itself in a really interesting way that I also really hadn't anticipated. The fact that it actually can fall apart, and there are moments of breakdown and moments that actually really don't work at all. And I think that there is that sense of finding a way through that becomes really interesting. So I don't know where else we might want to go with that, but do you have maybe?
Well, I think it's interesting that there's a way in which the mode, the medium that you've chosen for the artistic expression for exploring elements of the drone and its potential failures is also one that is very high risk. There's precarity in live performance. There's precarity in doing a solo performance. There's precarity in trying to coordinate lighting and special effects and all sorts of things, but also embodying characters and monologues. So there's a way in which the medium of your artistic exploration reinscribes the very topics that you're trying to explore. Yeah.
And maybe perhaps there was one kind of on ways in which I kind of wanted to pursue it, if not necessarily thinking so overtly in that way, but I think it really kind of makes sense because there was something that drew me into this and wanting to inhabit something in a really vulnerable way.
Well, also, I think when you were talking about accidents and the unexpected consequences and opportunities they provide, you've got that really nice line at the beginning with the voiceover. He said, "A twisted geometry of spilt forms and unmasked rolls of networks sought and broken. The drone now offers itself to salvage and continuation."
Yeah.
And then there's the other line of the investigator who's talking about how it reveals a hidden set of geometries and workings that are then open to use in terms of narrative, retooling, all sorts of things, and appropriation.
Yeah, I actually really like the term even, which I used a bit, describing as the idea of the salvage operation as a kind of artistic and I guess theoretical endeavor. That one, what does it mean for us to conduct salvage operations in a sense? Because there's a certain kind of orientation toward figuring out how to make something work, not necessarily dwelling too much on its lack. And I actually did really feel that pressure was a very interesting one, to feel that certain kind of orientation toward doing what can be done to make it work, and the kinds of adjustments and retoolings and rearrangements that kind of orientation necessitates or compels.
And that works at the material level, but it also works at the level of the various characters that you deploy, because all of them have a kind of, not only a vulnerability, but a sense of failure, a sense that something has gone wrong. They say again and again, it's not me, but they're not necessarily convinced. They're a bit whistling past the graveyard.
Yes.
And I was kind of wondering, much of this is about the elision of humans in certain ways from certain automated systems, or an embedding of them, or how humans are now supplements to machinic operations and data capturing, to capture all into the conversation, data capturing mechanisms that operate at all sorts of levels. And yet, at the same time, you decide to create a performance that features humans all the way through.
Yes.
And I'm just kind of, I'm interested in that sort of semi-paradoxical situation that you've chosen to kind of grab a hold of.
Yeah, it's a really, and I've thought about that being this really strange contradiction, that at the core of it in some way. And then, absolutely, in fact, though, they're all like, one person playing them. And so there's a certain kind of centrality to like the person, that it's me, and that there are particular bodies and identities, that are staged. And I think that what becomes really interesting to me is to figure out how this kinds of how a world of advancing automation and a world of distributed intelligence, or how we want to characterize it, impacts us as people who have to go about in the world, and people who do have relationships and have jobs and have assume roles. And I think that's really fascinating because, sometimes, I don't know if you've had the experience where sometimes you are next to someone and you have this sense that your reality is radically different from theirs, or theirs is radically different from yours, but we look the same. And there's all this sort of, we look the same, but we're really different. But difference, radical reorganization of the self doesn't necessarily mean that it has to look different. And I think that sometimes we feel that radical reorganization or decentralization necessarily kind of requires it's analog, something analogous in appearance. But appearance is a really interesting thing, and embodied roles and I wouldn't say identity so much, but are actually qualities that people need. And if we think about life is about kind of mobilizing, assembling, harnessing, sharing qualities, as part of living, though appearances are part of those qualities. And many of the times they need to be rather conventional in order to accrue advantage and to move ahead. So we harness norms and appearances and inhabit selves that are in bodies that are largely, in many ways, unnecessary, needing to look in a certain way in order to go about in the world. And so I think, so that really fascinates me there. So that kind of and the challenge of actually having a character to write that you find ways in which their sense of their self and the way they are in the world can perform that decentralization or that distribution or that kind of uncertainty and that kind of embeddedness within a kind of larger cognitive and affective world is really a big challenge. So,
I've got loads of topics here, but I'll just ask one more set of questions and then open it up, because I know people probably want to ask you a few things. And it has to do with the relationship. You mentioned it briefly in your introduction, the relationship between research and your art, because at your school, University of California, San Diego, Department of Visual Arts, our school, Winchester School of Art, University of Southampton, we're very invested in this deeply dialogical relationship between research and artistic production. So could you just talk a little bit about that, about the process and some of the things that you were doing? You explained a bit of the ethnographic bit, so maybe some other elements that...
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing about, I mean, I consider myself an artist, for the first and foremost with a research-based practice, and there's an amazing way, kind of possibilities that really affords you, that you can actually put together your kind of own, you borrow aspects of research methods from different disciplines, or, I mean, you could put together your kind of own methodology, and it could be in a certain kind of overall way of your practice or project-specific way. But so in the sense of here, it's a research method that's very hybrid, and it doesn't settle in easy into one description. And there is some would feel that the fact that it actually doesn't really commit to being ethnographic, or doesn't fully commit to being literary or fictional either, that's not satisfying as either one. But I do find that there is a really interesting combination, and the way that also all of us, we can operate as on different registers of being in the world. We can be historical persons, but also we can be affectively fluid and engaged entities, and we can also be in characters and dramas. So the difference between, we inhabit the register of being an actor, which may not necessarily be determined or linked to specific identities, an actor in a much more kind of generalized sense or situational kind of sense, as well as a historical person, a real person who has a history and has responsibilities in the world, and as well as characters in dramas, multiple kinds of dramas, or other kinds of fictional constructs that don't necessarily really align fully with the others, but nonetheless are really part of who we are. So a research practice, I think, can sort of inhabit these different registers as well, I feel, in many ways. So and here, of course, this work itself kind of operating as it's not really fully theater, and it's a performance, but it's also very, as I hope came through, it's also very tightly written, so it's also a literary endeavor, but it's also philosophical, and it has philosophical engagements and commitments in it, as well. So in a sense, it kind of operates as a certain kind of philosophical provocation, as a sort of performance work, or as a kind of somewhat theatrical endeavor, and as well as a kind of literary or fictional kind of work as well. And there's something also very deeply personal. That's something about a kind of intimate reverie that I would add, as well to that, the two. And so the two, so I do consider that research, even though it wouldn't necessarily be satisfied to someone in research in a scientific sense.
Yeah, I think it's quite clear that it operates on a number of different registers, and that there's a real interest in performance, performativity, the moment of enunciation, the role of narrative, what it means to try to construct narrative after the fact, which is the only time you can really have narrative.
Yes.
All right.
And one of these days, Ryan, we're going to collaborate on a video project, because I know that you have so much artistic leanings yourself, and you're very engaged with literary works, in particular in artworks, but in terms of your own production, to explore visual forms, image-based to moving image-based. I'm looking forward to coercing you or cajoling you into doing something in that area.
We were going to have Q&A, but I'm going to let Jordan flatter me some more. So. Now, can we open up the floor to questions, please?
Hi, thanks a lot for your performance. I think it was really interesting, and I really appreciate also your way of doing research that is pretty multiple. And I had a curiosity. I just wanted to know how come your interest for drones, and also in which way your research is informed by that, also beyond your performance. And are you also working on that in your specific research?
Yes, I've been working on drones, and that actually the interest in unmanned systems as a area of interest of mine led to this. So that's very much a part, and it's also a way to. So I do writing that is, alongside with this, that is really more specifically exploring various aspects of unmanned systems and drones in particular, but so that's very much comes first, let's say, from my interest as a writer and artist. And the one thing that's actually really interesting in this is that it gave me the opportunity to broaden that research by engaging with people who are involved with aspects of drone use that otherwise would be difficult to incorporate into the research. So people who are involved with DIY, communities, drone hacks communities, and drone hack site, DIY drones, who form local fly-up groups and who are really active in sharing knowledge and the ways in which drone communities kind of catalyze this sharing of knowledge and these experiences of people who get together and perform, their work. I mean, the sense of engaging test runs and so on, but also the ways in which it connected to the kinds of anxieties that we would have thought about before, during the Cold War, the ways in which kind of certain anxieties about invasion were embodied in constructs like UFOs. So there's also that really way to think about the kinds of pleasures and fears that kind of get kind of crystallize in drones that have a history that are really interesting to unpack. So that, and actually interesting because you actually go, all this sort of stuff also, everything opens up into something else. So as soon as you start looking at at these sites of drone sightings, websites of drone sightings. There, communities of people are actually really kind of involved in actually finding and sharing information that are about secret test projects. And there's all this way, but that there are all these sort of, ideas about these secret drones that are being tested and flown, and people spotting them, and the government, denying that they exist, and they're really kind of occupying this place where they actually do embody something that's really interesting in culture in this way. And so you find, that you find these different ways in which you can open it up into tap into those kinds of affective, if you want to call it, or that are not necessarily the kind of more usual orientations about drones get reported in certain venues that we might be more attuned to read. So.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. The idea of an archaeology of these of the machines, but also all of the psychic apparatus that goes around the machines, and how they reach back into the immediate past, but also more distant past. We probably have time for at least one more question. I'm mindful of time. There are a couple of hands up, so let's do these two, and then we can wrap up.
So, hi there. I was very interested in how you've chose to do it as a theatrical performance. In terms of how you've done the characters' monologues, did you intend on it to break the theatre's fourth wall? Was that done intentionally?
It's a good question. I didn't have a specific intention about how I would perform each one to start off with a bit, because that kind of grew and it changed a bit, and so that I even today I'd sort of found ways of kind of working in a private space where there wasn't really so much address, with characters who engaged in a much more direct address, but it sort of changed a bit. But that actually changed, and I didn't think about that so much at first. And there were lots of questions like that I think that part of the appeal of doing this is that those kinds of questions I in some way anticipated and wanted to confront, even though I didn't know how I would do that. And also being the fact that I'm not first and foremost a performer, so moving into that, you kind of anticipate there are lots of things that you are not going to really fully know. You're kind of entering into this really strange arena where you are going to have to confront things that you hadn't anticipated, and that's going to be really interesting, and you're going to kind of forge ahead with it. And there's something actually kind of, I don't know, it's I'd say, yeah, I don't want to say I'm so brave to do it or anything, but I mean, I think it's something that is about broadening one's horizons and stretching your abilities as an artist or a thinker, and taking on something that you are not entirely so convinced you're going to do well at was something, and it kind of really interesting for me. And I kind of don't know why I actually really did do that, but I just knew that something interesting was going to happen. And I think it's when you have to inhabit a character, it's a good experiment for everyone, because you have to find something in them. And some of these characters, it's really easy to, and I certainly did kind of make them to be a little more outrageous or menacing or maniacal or buffoonish. It's kind of, it's easy to create characters, but I think the challenge for me is to find a way that was a little more genuine, even if it's a character whose politics I don't subscribe to. So can we sort of find something in that character to access and to live with? It's a really good exercise because it helps in finding something that is part of someone who we may just block because we'd write them off as being someone we'd find offensive. And So I think that was also really surprising. And I think to varying degrees of success, because I do have this sort of moments at times when I feel like I was able to do that a bit, but then it would veer into the caricaturish, which I wasn't entirely really happy with. Like I kind of I didn't really want it to be too much. I mean, I think like the pillows and I mean, those kinds of things actually help you find someone a bit, but there's a danger in the fact that it becomes too,
So that was a pillow, yeah.
Or a towel.
Yeah. All right, I think there was one more question. Certainly there's one over here. Okay.
Yeah, I was just interested in that comment you made right now about what you discover in inhabiting another character. So my question then is, what do you think you discovered inhabiting the character of an immigrant crossing into alien country and going back into being an all-American guy?
Do you mean one of the characters?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where you fled over the border?
Yes.
So there's a character who becomes a character.
That becomes a character.
Yeah.
Well,
Because he mimics. He does
when he crosses over. You're referring to that in the sense of that. It's a really good question. I don't know that I found something to appreciate about him, and I think I ended up making him do what I wanted him to do more than finding something so genuine in him. So I think that I kind of did turn him into something I wanted in some way but I think that being aware of the complications of that was somehow worth it. And so I don't know would it sort of say that by doing it would make me more tolerant or more understanding of someone in his role? I think in certain broad ways, the thing that I found in these men, and they were all men because they were people I was playing, and it was kind of they were just that's what I I'm not an actor that's good to make too much of a stretch, but what does it say? So the finding of the character. I kind of lost my train of thought. What I was going to say. Oh, sorry. Okay. I know what I was going to say. Is that actually I found the thing I found with these characters a bit is that the struggle for them to find a place, even though I wouldn't appreciate or agree with the place that they found, but the kind of ways, the kind of need they felt to find a place where they belonged or were valued in a very broad sense is something I'd found to try to work with.
Okay. Okay, there's one more, and this will be the last one.
Hello. I guess in a keyword, the question I would like to pose has to do with trauma. And I saw the performance flashing before my eyes. I was thinking of Dr. Strangelove mixed with an Andy Warhol car crash, which of course became the paradigm in Hal Foster for traumatic reality. Now, of course, accidents are often traumatic, and I thought that was a wonderful anecdote to bring in Virilio, who basically, in my opinion, was saying that the crash of the past with the present, the present is the crash of the past with the future. So in other words, that the present is an accident. Yeah? And then this went on, something that might be of interest would be to look at, say, Catherine Malabou and her ontology of the accident, where she brings it back to what the performer was performing tonight, and that's the crash of the selves. In other words, inside of a traumatic reality, which kind of is the climate of modernism. Now we've had we have this crash of several selves within one body, and that's how I sort of interpreted the various roles, and somehow they all remained within a body, even though they were quite diverse. I think this trauma that at least I'm myself dealing with in the kind of situation that we're in now in this day and age. Perhaps there's something you would like to say about trauma and the self, or
especially in notions of distributed intelligence and distributed selves and an extensiveness of the self that all of these characters are kind of trying to cope with.
Yeah, it's really good that you brought that up. I think there was one particular monologue of the character with the cowboy hat when he basically kind of comes to this moment of seeing the drone as this figure of a self that's not based in, that's not a repressive or reductive one, that's not defined by enclosure, and he kind of goes off on this kind of like really interesting. Yes, and then in the end he kind of moves towards a surrender, where he turns from this kind of pursuit of mastery, or of gain, to a kind of acceptance, a kind of acquiescent, kind of move, and talks about, I don't want to go where I'm not, but where I already am, but I'm not looking for me. And so this kind of, looking for the self outside the self is a really, and I think that so this kind of ways in which the drone, the figure, sort of, he actually even says it's a sort of a, there's a sort of these moments of provocative questions, and of course this line of inquiry is not something that this character has really believably really indulge himself in, but perhaps, I don't know, maybe it is sort of, but actually, I think maybe I shouldn't say that. It's like sort of kind of making a sort of a judgment that I think that it kind of draws on a kind of psychoanalytic kind of like language that maybe could have been written a little bit more in keeping a bit with it. But this idea of the drone becoming this kind of figure for structuring principles, kind of new structuring principles, is really provocative in many ways. And of course, it's not like the drone would do this itself. Of course, it's embodying larger patterns, of a kind of a shift away from an interior-exterior relation as a sort of foundational dynamic, based in a difference, or enclosure. And so there's something model for some kind of self outside the self, and that's I think another area that is really interesting, that where unmanned systems start to really bring into play to help to crystallize, instantiate these kinds of larger shifts, I guess.
Yeah, I mean it's something Baudrillard talked about in the '60s in relation to television, is the end of the scene in which there's a subject in relation to objects, and that's been replaced by the scene in which we have no interior or exterior, and we're just nodes and networks, which is a lovely optimistic thought for us to end the evening. Jordan's performance is a very unconventional exploration of a whole set of techne and poesis, and that said, even though it's unconventional, I would like to have us all thank him in the conventional manner.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for coming.